"We don't have space here, you old parasite. Leave." That's what my daughter-in-law screamed when I came to my own beach house that morning. My house, my home, the place I built with 20 years of work. She stood there wearing my apron, surrounded by her family, laughing, eating, acting like they owned everything. And my son? He wasn't even there to defend me. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I just looked at her, smiled, and walked away. But inside, something changed. They thought they could humiliate me, take what's mine, and get away with it. They had no idea what was coming next. Stay with me, because this story, it doesn't end with tears. It ends with justice. Make sure you're subscribed and tell me, what would you have done if this happened to you? My name is Margaret Cole. I'm 68 years old, a retired literature teacher. I had just finished a short guest course in Chicago, and I was coming back to my home in Santa Barbara. That house on the cliff wasn't just a building to me. My husband Richard built it with his own hands 30 years ago. We used to call it our forever place. The road home always felt comforting. The ocean on one side, the wind on the other, the familiar turns I could drive with my eyes closed. I remember Richard once told me, "If we ever grow old here, promise me this house will always have laughter." I smiled when I thought about that. It had been a long, lonely few years since he passed, but the house always made me feel close to him. When I reached the gate, I noticed something strange. The front lights were on, even though I hadn't been home in months. There were cars I didn't recognize parked along the driveway. I assumed maybe Robert, my son, had come for the weekend with his wife and kids. It wouldn't be the first time. But as soon as I pushed the gate open, I heard laughter. Loud, careless laughter, the kind that doesn't belong in a quiet morning by the sea. For a second, I froze. I thought maybe there was a party. Then I saw her. Lydia, my daughter-in-law. She was standing on the porch wearing a silk robe, holding a glass of wine even though it was barely 10 a.m. She looked at me, head to toe, and smiled. That kind of smile that isn't really a smile at all. "Oh, look who's back," she said, the relic herself. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there with my suitcase, not sure I'd heard her correctly. The relic? She didn't wait for a response. "Kids," she called out. "Grandma's here. Be polite." Two little ones ran past me, shouting, laughing, chasing a ball across the yard. Not a single hello, not even a glance. I tried to smile, but it felt strange. "Lydia," I said quietly, "what's going on here?" She shrugged, swirling the wine in her glass. "We've been, adjusting things while you were gone." "Adjusting?" I asked. She leaned on the porch rail. "Robert said we could use the house for a bit. We've been making it more livable, more open. It was too empty before." I looked around. My garden was a mess. The lavender bushes I'd planted years ago were crushed. There were toys and towels everywhere. My white wicker chairs were gone, replaced by plastic ones. Someone had hung bright curtains that didn't match anything. "Where's Robert?" I asked. "Working," she said, as if the answer was obvious. "He's been so stressed. I told him we'd come here to rest. He said you wouldn't mind." I nodded slowly, trying to understand. "You've been here long?" She smiled, still not meeting my eyes. "A few weeks. The kids love it here. It's good for them." A man I'd never seen before walked out of the kitchen holding a coffee mug. He nodded slightly at Lydia and didn't even bother looking at me. Behind him, another woman appeared carrying a baby. "Who are these people?" I asked. Lydia turned her head, almost bored. "My sister, her husband, a friend from San Diego. We're all family here. Don't worry, everything's under control." Under control. Those words echoed in my head. She was talking about my house, my things, my life, as if I had no say in it. "I hope you didn't touch my things," I said quietly. "We moved a few boxes to the garage," she replied. "There wasn't much space for the kids' clothes. You'll find your stuff there." The way she said "your stuff" made my stomach twist. I walked past her into the hallway. The smell hit me first. Perfume, smoke, leftover food. The floor was sticky. The living room was full of bags, toys, and clothes. The photo of Richard and me that always sat on the mantel was gone. "Lydia," I said, trying to stay calm, "this isn't a hotel. You can't just—" She laughed softly. "Margaret, please, don't make this awkward. You've got your apartment in Chicago. You barely come here anymore. Why let it sit empty?" I looked at her, really looked, and realized something I hadn't before. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't apologetic. She felt confident. Like someone who knew she had backup. My throat felt dry. This house belongs to me. She raised her eyebrows. Robert's your son, isn't he? What's yours is his, and what's his is mine. For a few seconds I couldn't breathe. I just stared at her, at the wine glass, the robe, the easy arrogance in her face. The noise around me felt distant. Children laughing, a TV playing somewhere, waves crashing below the cliff. Everything was happening too fast, and yet too slow. Finally, I stepped back outside, my hand shaking slightly on the doorknob. Enjoy your day, Lydia, I said softly. She smirked. We will? I walked toward my car, still hearing the laughter behind me, the same laughter Richard once said this house should always have. But that day, it didn't sound like joy. It sounded like victory. When I reached the car, I stopped for a moment and looked back at the house. The curtains moved in the wind. Someone was shouting from inside. The place didn't look like mine anymore. That's when it hit me. I wasn't coming home. I was walking into a place where I no longer belonged. I had stepped into my own house. As a stranger. When I stepped inside the house, the first thing I noticed was the silence that wasn't really silence at all. It was the sound of voices, laughter, and music echoing from the living room, but none of it felt like home. My eyes moved slowly across the space I had loved for so long, and it didn't take me long to realize that everything had been changed. The paintings Richard had made of the ocean, the ones he hung by the windows to catch the morning light, were gone. The bookshelf where I kept my favorite novels had disappeared. Even my small reading desk, the one where I spent years grading papers and writing notes, had been replaced by a large massage chair that didn't belong here. It all looked wrong, careless, soulless. The room smelled of food and wine and something burnt. Empty bottles lined the counter, and someone had thrown a wet towel over the arm of my favorite chair. The lavender scent that once filled this place was gone, replaced by a smell I couldn't recognize, something heavy, almost bitter. I turned around and saw Lydia walking toward me. She wasn't surprised to see me. If anything, she looked slightly annoyed. Her voice was calm, too calm. "Oh, you're back earlier than expected," she said, holding her phone in one hand. "Where's Daniel?" I asked, trying to sound steady. She shrugged, still scrolling through her screen. "Working," she said lightly, as if that explained everything. "He said we could stay while you were away. You don't mind, do you?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, then looked around again, wondering if I was dreaming. I wanted to believe this was temporary, a misunderstanding, something that could still make sense. But then a woman I didn't know came out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel that looked suspiciously familiar. It took me a second to realize it was mine. My apron, the one with blue embroidery that Richard had given me for our anniversary years ago. The woman smiled and looked me up and down before saying, "Oh, you must be the mother-in-law. You don't look like a homeowner, dear. More like the help." Her words cut through me like glass. Behind her, a man I didn't recognize laughed, and even Lydia smiled as if it were funny. I didn't say anything. My throat tightened and my hands trembled slightly. I wanted to say something sharp, something that would make them stop laughing, but no words came out. I walked toward the stairs. The house didn't sound like mine anymore. Children were running around upstairs, their feet pounding on the wood, and someone had turned the television up too loud. I climbed the steps slowly, my hand brushing along the railing that Richard had sanded himself, the wood now sticky from what looked like spilled soda. The hallway was cluttered with shoes, towels, and toys. When I opened the door to my bedroom, I froze. 2 of my grandchildren were jumping on the bed, laughing, screaming, throwing pillows into the air. My bed. The one I had shared with Richard for 25 years. The one where I used to sit and write letters to Daniel when he was away at college. The photo frame on the nightstand was turned face down, and when I picked it up, I saw the glass cracked. Our wedding photo stared back at me, distorted through the fracture. "Please don't do that," I said softly to the children. "You could get hurt." They didn't even look at me. They kept jumping. I placed the frame gently back on the table and turned to the doorway. Lydia was standing there, leaning against the frame, arms crossed, smiling faintly like she was watching a show. "You really should relax, Maggie," she said. "The kids are just having fun." It took me a moment to process what she said. Maggie. She had never called me that before. "Since when do you call me Maggie?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She shrugged. "Since we've all been living together like one big family. You should get used to it. Things are different now." I looked around the room, my clothes folded in piles I didn't make, my dresser drawers half open, my jewelry box missing from the table. "This is still my house?" I said quietly, forcing the words out. Lydia smiled, that same cold, polite smile. "Of course it is. But Daniel's your son, isn't he? What's yours is his, and what's his is mine. That's how family works." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My chest tightened as I tried to find something to say, some way to defend what was rightfully mine, but I felt like I was standing in quicksand. The more I tried to move, the deeper I sank. I could still hear the children laughing, the sound of the TV downstairs, the clinking of glasses in the kitchen. Life went on as if I wasn't even there. Lydia took a few steps closer. Her perfume filled the air, sharp and artificial. "Look, Margaret," she said, her tone suddenly softer. "You've had a good life here, but it's time to let go. There's no space for you here anymore. This house belongs to a new generation now." The way she said it, calm, almost tender, was worse than if she had shouted. It was the kind of cruelty that hides behind kindness. I looked at her for a long time and realized she wasn't just trying to hurt me. She was declaring victory. I had already lost, and she knew it. I nodded slowly. "I see," I said. My voice didn't shake, but I could feel the tremor deep inside me. I turned around, walked past her, and went downstairs. Nobody followed. Nobody asked me to stay. I could still hear them laughing when I reached the door. Outside, the air smelled of salt and cold wind. I stood there for a few seconds, listening to the waves crash against the rocks below, the same sound Richard used to love. I thought of the promise he had once made me repeat, that our home would always have laughter, and he was right, it still did. But it wasn't the laughter he meant. I got into my car, placed my hands on the steering wheel, and just sat there. My reflection stared back at me in the mirror, tired, older, smaller than I remembered. I started the engine, but I didn't drive away right away. I kept thinking about what Lydia had said, how easily she had claimed my home, my memories, my life. And then it hit me. Betrayal doesn't always come in one violent moment. Sometimes it slips quietly through the front door, smiling, polite, and patient. Sometimes it doesn't need knives or shouts. Sometimes it wears silk and holds a glass of wine. That night, I checked into a small hotel called the Seaside Inn, just a few miles away from my house. The woman at the front desk smiled kindly when she handed me the key, asking if I was visiting family. I didn't know how to answer, so I just nodded. My voice wouldn't have come out even if I'd tried. The room was simple. A small bed, a window facing the ocean, and the steady sound of the waves hitting the shore. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without moving, my suitcase still closed on the floor. I could see the faint glow of my house from the window, the terrace lights still on. From here, it looked peaceful. But I knew the truth. It wasn't peace anymore. It was invasion. I finally opened the suitcase, telling myself I needed to find my savings book and check how much money I had left. My hands moved through folded clothes and papers, but instead, I found something I hadn't seen in years. The photo frame that had fallen earlier that day in my bedroom. I must have packed it without realizing. The glass was still cracked, and behind the picture of Richard and me on our wedding day, there was a faint piece of paper tucked in the back. I hesitated for a moment, then pulled it out carefully. It was a letter, yellowed at the edges, written in Richard's handwriting. My chest tightened as I unfolded it. His handwriting was so familiar it almost hurt to look at. It said, "If one day you stand alone here, protect your dignity first, not the house." I read it again and again until the words started to blur. For years, I had thought of that house as the last piece of Richard I had left. Every room, every chair, every picture, all of it was a part of the life we built together. But reading his words made me realize something I hadn't allowed myself to see. The house wasn't Richard. The house wasn't me. It was only a place. What mattered was the dignity we built inside it, and that no one could take from me unless I let them. I put the letter back inside the frame and placed it on the nightstand. The lamp cast a soft yellow light across the room. I turned to the window again. The house was still visible from there, small, distant, glowing against the darkness, but to me that light looked different now. It wasn't home anymore. It was just a building full of strangers. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the sound of the sea. Every wave that crashed seemed to echo inside my chest. The anger that had been quiet all day started to rise. Not the kind that makes you shout, but the quiet kind that focuses you, sharpens you. I realized Lydia thought she had won. She thought that by humiliating me, by filling my home with her laughter, she had broken me. But she had no idea who I used to be. People always think of teachers as soft, as gentle as people who avoid conflict. What they forget is that teachers fight every day, with minds, with words, with patience. And I had spent 40 years teaching people how to think clearly, how to defend themselves with reason and truth. Maybe I had stopped working, but I hadn't forgotten how to fight. As I looked out the window, I could still see the light from the terrace of my house. It flickered for a second, maybe because of the wind or maybe just my imagination. Either way, it felt symbolic. That house was shining, but for me it had already gone dark. The warmth I had built there for decades was gone. They had replaced it with noise, arrogance, and lies. But I would not let that be the final chapter. I got up, went to the small desk in the hotel room, and opened my notebook. My hands still trembled a little, but my thoughts were clear. I started to make a list, people I could call, documents I needed to check, things I had to protect. I wrote down the name of my bank, the lawyer who had helped us draft our will years ago, and the few neighbors I still trusted. Each word on that page felt like a step away from despair and toward something solid. For the first time since that morning, I wasn't just remembering or grieving. I was planning. I thought about Lydia's face when she told me there was no space for me in my own home. Her calm, confident voice. The way she smiled when she said the house belonged to a new generation. She believed she had taken everything from me. She didn't realize she had only woken something I had forgotten. The part of me that doesn't back down, that doesn't cry quietly and disappear. I leaned back in the chair, looked at the ocean again, and whispered to myself, they forgot I used to teach people how to fight with words. The sound of my own voice surprised me. It wasn't angry anymore. It was steady, grounded, certain. The fear that had been in my chest all day started to fade, replaced by something stronger, resolve. I wasn't just an old woman who lost her house. I was a woman who had spent her entire life surviving, adapting, and teaching others how to stand their ground. I had faced worse things than greedy in-laws and disrespectful children. When I finally lay down that night, I kept the letter on the nightstand beside me. The light from the window flickered across it. For the first time, I didn't feel defeated. I felt awake. The pain was still there, but it had changed. It wasn't weakness anymore. It was fuel. And before I closed my eyes, I made a promise to myself, and maybe to Richard too. I would protect what mattered, not just the house, but the truth, my dignity, my name. Tomorrow, I would start fighting. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lydia's face, her calm smile, her voice saying there was no space for me in my own house. The anger that had started last night hadn't faded. It had turned into something colder. I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. I drove back to the house around 8. The sky was pale and gray, the ocean restless. As I turned into the driveway, I felt my hands tighten on the steering wheel. There were still cars parked there, the same ones as yesterday. Music was playing again, someone was laughing inside. For a second, I almost turned back, but then I remembered Richard's letter. Protect your dignity first. I wasn't here to argue. I was here to understand what they were doing. When I rang the bell, it wasn't Lydia who opened the door. It was her sister, Veronica. She had the same sharp tone, the same cold eyes. She looked at me up and down and smiled, not kindly, but with mockery. "Oh, you again," she said, crossing her arms. "Your stuff's in the garage." I nodded, trying not to react. I walked past her and into the hallway. The house looked even worse than before, the smell of cheap perfume mixed with cleaning products and burnt food. They had changed the floor, laminate panels covering the old wood Richard had spent weeks polishing by hand. Every step I took sounded hollow. The living room was unrecognizable. The painting of the sea that Richard had made was gone, replaced by a flat-screen TV. The curtains were new, bright and gaudy, and the furniture had been moved around. I could see cigarette burns on the arm of the sofa. My books, which used to be neatly lined on the shelf, were stacked in boxes near the door like junk ready to be thrown away. "Don't take too long," Veronica said behind me, her tone dripping with annoyance. "We're having brunch in an hour." I ignored her and went straight to the garage. The moment I opened the door, the smell hit me, a mix of dust, dampness, and something sour. Piles of black trash bags covered the floor. I bent down and opened one. Inside were my clothes, wrinkled and thrown together with old magazines, picture frames, and kitchen towels, I reached into another and found one of Richard's coats, the one he used to wear every winter. It was covered in oil stains. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I went through the rest of the bags. Everything was there, but nothing was where it should be. Years of my life reduced to garbage. On the workbench, I saw a pile of papers scattered under a half-empty cup of coffee. I picked them up, thinking they might be bills or letters, but then I froze. The first sheet was a property transfer form, with my name printed at the top. Margaret Cole, transfer of ownership, and underneath my signature. I stared at it, my vision blurring. It was my name, but I hadn't signed anything. The signature looked right, the curve of the M, the way I always crossed the T, but I hadn't touched a pen. Someone had forged it. Behind it was another document, a medical report dated just a week ago. Patient, Margaret Cole. Diagnosis, early-stage dementia. I read the words again and again, unable to believe what I was seeing. Dementia. Me. The woman who had taught literature for 40 years, who still remembered every poem she'd ever read, who balanced her checkbook every month. My knees weakened and I had to grab the edge of the table to stay upright. My mind started racing. If they had this, if they had my signature, then they weren't just trying to use the house. They were trying to take it legally. I looked around the garage, my eyes scanning for anything else. That's when I saw the metal cabinet, my old safe, the one Richard and I used to keep important papers in. The door was open, the lock broken. Inside, everything was gone except a few old receipts and one insurance form. My throat tightened. They had gone through every inch of my life. My documents, my photos, even my memories. On the table beside the papers, there was a small notebook. I opened it, my hands still shaking. The first page was filled with quick, messy handwriting. It wasn't mine. It said, "Once the approval clears, she's out legally." The words blurred as I read them. I felt my chest tighten until it hurt. They weren't just waiting for me to give up. They were planning everything, my removal, my erasure, my disappearance. I sat down on the small stool by the workbench, trying to breathe. My hands were still gripping the note. For a moment, everything around me went quiet. The noise from the house faded. I couldn't hear the laughter anymore, or the music, or the sea outside. Just my own heartbeat. That's when I realized it. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a burial. They were trying to bury me while I was still alive. I could almost hear Lydia's voice in my head, calm and sweet, telling her mother that I wouldn't fight, that I'd just leave quietly. I whispered out loud, "They've already buried me. I'm just reading the obituary." The words came out shaky, but as soon as I said them, something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to let this be the end. I couldn't. I picked up the forged documents and folded them carefully. These weren't just lies, they were evidence. Proof of what they were trying to do. When I stepped back into the hallway, Veronica was still standing near the kitchen, drinking from a glass of juice. She smirked when she saw me. "Find everything you needed?" I looked at her for a long moment, long enough for her smile to falter. "More than you think," I said quietly. She didn't answer. I walked past her, out the front door and into the sunlight. The air outside felt heavy, the kind of weight that only comes after betrayal. I stood there for a moment, staring at the ocean. It looked beautiful, calm, endless, but I knew now that peace is never guaranteed. You have to fight for it, even at 70. As I walked to my car, I could feel something shifting inside me again, the same way it had the night before when I read Richard's letter. Only this time it wasn't sadness. It was fury, silent and sharp. They wanted to take my house, my name, my sanity. But they had underestimated the one thing I still had left: clarity. I started the car and took one last look at the house. From the outside, it still looked perfect, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. The sanctuary Richard built was broken, and if I didn't fight back soon, they would make sure I disappeared, legally, quietly, forever. So as I drove away, I made myself another promise. They could forge papers, they could tell lies, but they would never write my ending for me. I would. I didn't go back to the hotel right away. I drove around for a while, not really knowing where I was heading. The ocean ran beside me, calm and indifferent, while inside me everything was chaos. I ended up stopping at a small cafe near the pier, the same one Richard and I used to visit on weekends. The place hadn't changed. The same old sign, the same smell of roasted coffee beans, the same couple of locals reading newspapers at the corner table. I sat down near the window, facing the water. My hands still trembled from what I had seen that morning. My name on forged papers, a fake medical report declaring me incompetent. I felt like a ghost watching my own life being rewritten. The waitress brought me a cup of coffee. I wrapped my hands around it just to feel something warm. I told myself I would sit there for 10 minutes, collect my thoughts, and then go to the bank. But before I could take a sip, someone tapped my shoulder. "Mrs. Cole?" I turned around and for a moment I couldn't place the face. Then it clicked. Marisol, my old housekeeper. She used to help me twice a week before Lydia told me she wasn't needed anymore. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, her eyes red and tired. "Marisol?" I said quietly. "Oh my God, it's been months." She nodded quickly and looked around as if making sure no one was watching. "Can I sit with you, please?" she whispered. "Of course," I said. Are you okay?" She sat down, her hands shaking as she pulled her phone from her bag. "I shouldn't even be here," she said, "but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about you." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I saw what they did. For a second, I didn't understand. My heart started to beat faster. "What do you mean you saw?" She took a deep breath and unlocked her phone. "I was at the house 2 weeks ago. Lydia told me to come clean before the new flooring arrived. I wasn't supposed to talk to you anymore, but I missed working there. So I went." She slid the phone across the table. The video was already open. I hesitated for a moment before pressing play. The image was shaky, filmed from behind a slightly open door. I saw my bedroom. My safe, the one I had found open that morning, was in the frame. And then, one by one, they appeared. Lydia, her mother, and Daniel. Daniel was holding a stack of papers. Lydia stood next to him with a pen. Her mother laughed and said something I couldn't quite make out. Then Lydia said, clear as day, "Once this is signed, she's done, legally and mentally." Daniel laughed, my son, laughing, and then signed the paper. Lydia took the pen and forged my name beneath it, the same way I had seen on the document that morning. They all smiled. Lydia's mother even poured herself a glass of wine. When the video ended, I realized my hands were gripping the table so tightly my knuckles were white. My coffee had gone cold. "Why didn't you show me this before?" I asked, my voice low but trembling. Marisol wiped her eyes. "I was scared. They told me if I ever said anything, they'd say I stole money. I don't have papers, Mrs. Cole. I can't risk it." I took a deep breath, trying to calm the anger rising inside me. "Marisol, you did the right thing by coming to me now. This changes everything." She nodded, her tears still falling. "I kept thinking about you. You were always kind to me, always treated me like a person, not a servant. When I saw what they did, I knew it was wrong. But I didn't know what to do. Last night I prayed, and this morning I saw you drive by. It felt like maybe it was a sign." Her voice cracked on the last word. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold, trembling, fragile, but what she had just handed me was stronger than anything I could have imagined. "You just gave me back my power," I said quietly. She looked down, almost ashamed. "I don't want any trouble. I just wanted to help." "You already have," I said. "You did more than anyone else." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The cafe was quiet except for the hum of the espresso machine and the sound of the waves outside. I thought of that video, of Lydia's face, of Daniel's laughter, of the pen scratching my name across that page. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had mocked me while doing it. But now I had proof. Solid, undeniable proof. I pulled out my notebook and wrote down Marisol's number. "I'm going to show this to someone I trust," I said. "A lawyer? I won't mention your name unless it's absolutely necessary, I promise." She nodded, relief washing over her face. "Thank you, Mrs. Cole." "Thank you," I corrected gently, "for being brave." She smiled through her tears. "You always said words can change things. Maybe now they will." When she left, I stayed for a few minutes, staring at the phone screen replaying the frozen image of Lydia and Daniel smiling over my forged signature. It felt unreal, like watching strangers wearing the faces of people I once loved. I finally turned off the phone, slid it into my bag, and looked out the window. The sun was climbing higher, cutting through the morning fog. The sea looked brighter, sharper. For the first time in days, I didn't feel powerless. Lydia thought she had taken everything from me, my home, my name, even my sanity. But she had forgotten something Richard once told me. Truth doesn't shout. It waits. Now I had the truth. And soon everyone else would see it too. That night I couldn't sleep. The room at the seaside inn felt colder than usual, even with the heater on. I kept replaying everything in my mind. The forged documents, Marisol's video, the sound of Lydia's laughter, Daniel's signature, my son's betrayal. I'd spent the entire evening staring at the ocean, trying to understand how people I loved could turn into strangers overnight. I had just turned off the light when my phone buzzed. A video call. At first, I thought it was Marisol again, but when I looked at the screen, my heart stopped. It was Lily, my granddaughter. She was sitting on her bed holding a stuffed bear, her small face glowing in the light of her tablet. "Grandma?" she whispered, smiling. "Can you see me?" I sat up immediately, wiping my eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, I can see you." "It's late. Why are you still awake?" She looked around nervously before whispering again. "Mommy's downstairs. She doesn't know I'm calling." A lump formed in my throat. "Lily, you shouldn't be sneaking around like that." "I know," she said quickly, her voice trembling a little. "But I wanted to see you. Mommy said, you're sick. She said you're crazy, but—" She leaned closer to the camera. "You don't look crazy." The words hit me like a knife and a cure at the same time. I felt my heart ache, but I also felt something warm rising in me. A 10-year-old child could see through the lies the adults were spinning. I smiled gently, though my eyes filled with tears. "Do I really look okay?" She nodded. "You look a little sad, but not crazy." I let out a soft laugh. "That's because I miss you, that's all." She held up her bear. "I told Mommy I missed you too. She said we can't visit until the papers are done." "What papers?" I froze. "What did you say?" "The papers," she repeated. "The ones Mommy keeps in the drawer by her desk. She was writing your name on them yesterday. I asked what she was doing, but she told me to go watch TV. My chest tightened. "Did she say anything else?" Lily bit her lip, thinking. She said, "Grandma won't even remember any of this soon." And then she laughed. The silence between us hung heavy. I tried to breathe normally so she wouldn't see how shaken I was. "Lily," I said softly, "thank you for telling me. You did the right thing." "Am I in trouble?" she asked, eyes wide. "No, sweetheart," I whispered, holding back tears. "You're brave. You told the truth. And I promise, I'll fix it." She nodded, her small face serious now. "Will you come home soon?" I hesitated. "Not yet. But soon, okay? I just need to make things right first." Her lower lip quivered. "I don't like it when Mommy gets mad at you." "I know," I said. "But sometimes grown-ups make bad choices. And when they do, we have to be strong enough to face them." She looked confused, but nodded again. "Okay." Then she whispered, "I love you, Grandma." I smiled, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. "I love you too, Lily, more than anything." Before she hung up, she added, "Mommy's coming upstairs. I have to go. Bye." The screen went dark. I sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the black screen of the phone. Her words kept echoing in my head. "You don't look crazy." For days, I had been surrounded by lies, betrayal, forged papers, and fake smiles. But in just a few words, that little girl had reminded me of who I was. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being gaslighted, slowly, deliberately, by the people I had trusted most. That realization felt like oxygen after drowning. I wiped my tears and stood up. I needed to do something that would make sense of all this madness. I reached for the phone again, scrolled through my contacts, and found the number I hadn't called in months. My sister, Helen. Helen had been a psychologist for over 30 years before she retired. Older than me by 5 years, always calm, always rational, the opposite of my emotional storms. She answered on the second ring. "Maggie," she said, her voice still the same, warm but sharp, always listening for what wasn't said. "It's late. What's wrong?" I hesitated, and then everything came pouring out. Lydia's insults, the invasion, the forged documents, Marisol's video, and now Lily's call. Helen didn't interrupt. She let me speak until my voice cracked. When I finally stopped, she was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said softly, "Oh, Maggie." "I don't know what to do," I whispered. "It feels like they've already buried me. Legally, emotionally, everything. And now they're dragging Lily into it. Helen sighed, a deep, knowing sound. They're trying to make you feel powerless, but you're not. You've already done the hardest part. You saw the truth. That's how you start winning. I didn't answer. I just listened to her voice, calm and steady like an anchor. Maggie, she continued, it's time to fight with your head, not your heart. You've spent your whole life teaching people how to think clearly. Now you have to use that same skill for yourself. I nodded, wiping my eyes. But I don't even know where to begin. You begin, she said, by staying calm. You have proof, the video, the documents, and now even a child's testimony. That's more than most people ever get. Tomorrow you'll go to a lawyer. I'll help you find one. And Maggie? Yes. Don't let anger drive you. Let purpose do it. Lydia wants you to break. Don't give her that satisfaction. Her words sank deep. For the first time in days, I felt something solid inside me again. A plan, a reason. Thank you, Helen, I said quietly. That's what sisters are for, she replied. Now go to sleep. Tomorrow, we start fighting. After we hung up, I walked to the window. The moon was full, lighting up the waves below. Somewhere in that house by the cliffs, Lydia was probably sleeping soundly, believing she had won, but she didn't know that her own daughter had given me the truth. A truth strong enough to burn through every lie they had built. I placed my hand on the cold glass and whispered to the night, You made a mistake, Lydia. You thought I was alone. But I wasn't. I had Lily. I had Helen. I had the truth. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel broken. I felt ready. That night, I couldn't sleep. The room at the seaside inn felt colder than usual, even with the heater on. I kept replaying everything in my mind. The forged documents, Marisol's video, the sound of Lydia's laughter, Daniel's signature, my son's betrayal. I'd spent the entire evening staring at the ocean, trying to understand how people I loved could turn into strangers overnight. I had just turned off the light when my phone buzzed. A video call. At first, I thought it was Marisol again. But when I looked at the screen, my heart stopped. It was Lily, my granddaughter. She was sitting on her bed holding a stuffed bear, her small face glowing in the light of her tablet. Grandma, she whispered, smiling. Can you see me? I sat up immediately, wiping my eyes. Yes, sweetheart, I can see you. It's late. Why are you still awake? She looked around nervously before whispering again. Mommy's downstairs. She doesn't know I'm calling. A lump formed in my throat. Lily, you shouldn't be sneaking around like that. I know, she said quickly, her voice trembling a little. But I wanted to see you. Mommy said, You're sick. She said you're crazy, but... She leaned closer to the camera. You don't look crazy. The words hit me like a knife and a cure at the same time. I felt my heart ache, but I also felt something warm rising in me. A 10-year-old child could see through the lies the adults were spinning. I smiled gently, though my eyes filled with tears. Do I really look okay? She nodded. You look a little sad, but not crazy. I let out a soft laugh. That's because I miss you, that's all. She held up her bear. I told Mommy I missed you too. She said we can't visit until the papers are done. What papers? I froze. What did you say? The papers, she repeated. The ones Mommy keeps in the drawer by her desk. She was writing your name on them yesterday. I asked what she was doing, but she told me to go watch TV. My chest tightened. Did she say anything else? Lily bit her lip, thinking. She said, Grandma won't even remember any of this soon. And then she laughed. The silence between us hung heavy. I tried to breathe normally so she wouldn't see how shaken I was. Lily, I said softly, thank you for telling me. You did the right thing. Am I in trouble? She asked, eyes wide. No, sweetheart, I whispered, holding back tears. You're brave. You told the truth, and I promise, I'll fix it. She nodded, her small face serious now. Will you come home soon? I hesitated. Not yet. But soon, okay? I just need to make things right first. Her lower lip quivered. I don't like it when Mommy gets mad at you. I know, I said. But sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, and when they do, we have to be strong enough to face them. She looked confused, but nodded again. Okay? Then she whispered, I love you, Grandma. I smiled, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. I love you too, Lily. More than anything. Before she hung up, she added, Mommy's coming upstairs. I have to go. Bye." The screen went dark. I sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the black screen of the phone. Her words kept echoing in my head. "You don't look crazy." For days, I had been surrounded by lies, betrayal, forged papers, and fake smiles. But in just a few words, that little girl had reminded me of who I was. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being gaslighted. Slowly, deliberately, by the people I had trusted most. That realization felt like oxygen after drowning. I wiped my tears and stood up. I needed to do something that would make sense of all this madness. I reached for the phone again, scrolled through my contacts, and found the number I hadn't called in months. My sister, Helen. Helen had been a psychologist for over 30 years before she retired. Older than me by 5 years, always calm, always rational, the opposite of my emotional storms. She answered on the second ring. "Maggie?" she said, her voice still the same, warm but sharp, always listening for what wasn't said. "It's late. What's wrong?" I hesitated, and then everything came pouring out. Lydia's insults, the invasion, the forged documents, Marisol's video, and now Lily's call. Helen didn't interrupt. She let me speak until my voice cracked. When I finally stopped, she was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said softly, "Oh, Maggie." "I don't know what to do," I whispered. "It feels like they've already buried me. Legally, emotionally, everything. And now they're dragging Lily into it." Helen sighed, a deep, knowing sound. "They're trying to make you feel powerless, but you're not. You've already done the hardest part. You saw the truth. That's how you start winning." I didn't answer. I just listened to her voice, calm and steady like an anchor. "Maggie," she continued, "it's time to fight with your head, not your heart. You've spent your whole life teaching people how to think clearly. Now you have to use that same skill for yourself." I nodded, wiping my eyes. "But I don't even know where to begin." "You begin," she said, "by staying calm. You have proof, the video, the documents, and now even a child's testimony. That's more than most people ever get. Tomorrow you'll go to a lawyer. I'll help you find one. And Maggie." "Yes?" "Don't let anger drive you. Let purpose do it. Lydia wants you to break. Don't give her that satisfaction." Her words sank deep. For the first time in days, I felt something solid inside me again. A plan, a reason. "Thank you, Helen," I said quietly. "That's what sisters are for," she replied. "Now go to sleep. Tomorrow, we start fighting." After we hung up, I walked to the window. The moon was full, lighting up the waves below. Somewhere in that house by the cliffs, Lydia was probably sleeping soundly, believing she had won. But she didn't know that her own daughter had given me the truth, a truth strong enough to burn through every lie they had built. I placed my hand on the cold glass and whispered to the night, "You made a mistake, Lydia. You thought I was alone. But I wasn't. I had Lily. I had Helen. I had the truth. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel broken. I felt ready." By Monday morning, everything was in motion. Helen had found me a lawyer, Thomas Grant, a calm, sharp man who didn't waste words. His office smelled like paper and quiet power. I handed him every piece of evidence I had, the forged deed, the fake medical report, the video from Marisol. He went through each page carefully, marking lines with his pen, nodding every few seconds. When he finished, he looked at me with something like respect. "Mrs. Cole," he said, "this isn't a family disagreement. It's a criminal setup, and you have more than enough proof to make it fall apart." I sat still, my hands folded on the table. "Then we start today." He smiled slightly. "I like clients who don't hesitate." That afternoon, the complaint went out. Fraud, falsification of medical documents, attempted illegal transfer of property, and emotional abuse toward a senior citizen. My signature was firm, clean, and real. Every letter felt like taking back one piece of myself they had tried to steal. The next morning, the bank called. Mr. Davis, the branch manager who had known Richard and me for years, spoke in his calm, professional tone. "Mrs. Cole," he said, "we've completed the review you requested. Your cognitive and financial records show no signs of impairment. We've also flagged the fake medical report to the authorities." "So it's official," I said quietly. "They used false papers." "Yes, ma'am. And the bank will be happy to issue a written statement confirming your mental capacity. We've already frozen any unauthorized access to your accounts. No one's touching your money again. I closed my eyes and exhaled. For days, I had felt trapped in someone else's story, one where I was the fragile, confused old woman. Now, the truth was on paper. I wasn't broken. I wasn't crazy. I was documented, verified, and ready to fight. By noon, the documents had been filed with the court. By evening, Lydia got served. I didn't see her face when it happened, but I didn't need to. I could imagine it. The shock, the fear, the denial. For the first time, she wasn't in control. The phone rang that night. I knew it was her before I even looked at the screen. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times before answering. Her voice came sharp and breathless through the line. You filed a lawsuit against your own family? Against Daniel? Against your son? My son is part of this, I said calmly. He signed those forged papers. You're ruining him, Margaret, she shouted. You're ruining your own son. I looked out the window, the lights of the ocean glinting in the dark. No, Lydia, I said. My voice was quiet but steady. I'm rescuing the man you buried under your greed. There was silence on the other end. Just breathing, hers fast, mine steady. You think you're going to win? She said finally, her tone dripping with contempt. You're old. Maggie. No judge will side with someone who can barely climb stairs. You'd be surprised what an old woman can do when she's cornered. Another silence, then a click. The call ended. I stood there for a long time, holding the phone in my hand. My pulse was slow now, steady. For the first time since this started, I wasn't reacting. I was leading. The fear had turned into focus. The anger had turned into action. The next morning, Thomas called with updates. The court has accepted the case, he said. Lydia and Daniel are officially under investigation for property fraud. Their lawyer already contacted us, but don't worry. They're in panic mode. What about the medical report? The doctor who signed it has been subpoenaed. Once he talks, everything collapses. I nodded. My hands didn't shake anymore. Every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that they had tried to erase. That afternoon, I went back to my house. From the street, it looked peaceful again. The waves below, the lavender swaying in the wind, the same view Richard used to paint. But now, there were legal notices taped to the gate signed by the court. Lydia's new generation had been officially evicted by law. I stepped inside. The silence hit me first. No voices, no laughter, no cheap perfume, just the creak of the wooden floor and the faint smell of salt and lavender. My home again, wounded, but mine. I walked through every room slowly, the kitchen, the living room, the study. I ran my fingers across the surfaces, feeling the small scratches, the stains, the damage. Each one told a story, but now they were part of a different chapter, the one where I stopped being the victim. When I reached Richard's old painting, the one I had found thrown behind the sofa, I put it back on the wall. The sea in it looked wild and alive. I smiled. He would have been proud. That evening I stood on the terrace as the sun set. The air was cold, sharp, and clean. My phone buzzed with messages, reporters, lawyers, neighbors who had seen the police earlier. I didn't answer any of them. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. I was done defending my sanity. Now, I was defending my truth. And this time, the world was going to hear it. One court document at a time. It started on a Tuesday morning. Thomas called me before I even had time to make coffee. His voice was steady, but I could hear the shift in tone, that quiet alert before a storm. Mrs. Cole, he said, the local paper picked up your case. I froze. What do you mean, picked up? He paused for a second. Front page. Retired teacher battles family fraud. They got the story from the public court filings. It's out there now. I walked to the window, phone still pressed to my ear. The ocean looked calm, too calm. So everyone knows? Yes, he said, and judging by the calls we're getting, they all have opinions. By noon, my phone was full of messages, old colleagues, neighbors, even former students. Some wrote to say how proud they were of me for standing up for myself. Others just wrote one word, unbelievable. I turned on the TV. There it was. My face, my house, the same headlines. Elderly woman fights to keep her home. Family fraud allegations rock Santa Barbara community. They showed a clip of me walking into the courthouse with Thomas. The camera angle made me look smaller than I felt, but my back was straight, my chin high. The reporter's voice said, Sources claim Mrs. Cole's son and daughter-in-law attempted to take ownership of her property through forged medical reports. The case has raised questions about elder abuse and financial exploitation within families. I turned the TV off. The silence that followed was almost too heavy to bear. That afternoon, the calls changed. Reporters, bloggers, local radio hosts, all wanting a comment. I didn't answer any of them. Thomas told me not to. The best response would have said, well, is dignity. But not everyone stayed silent. Lydia didn't. By the evening, her social media was full of posts, smiling pictures with captions like, "Some people will say anything for attention." Her friends flooded the comments with hearts and support emojis, but by the next day, the tide turned. The article had gone viral. Thousands of people read it. The comments section exploded. Poor woman. How could they do this to their own mother? Greed has no bloodline. People started digging into Lydia's public posts. The designer clothes, the vacations, the house parties. Screenshots began circulating with captions like, "All on Grandma's money." By Thursday, she locked all her accounts. Daniel stayed quiet, completely silent. He didn't show up for work. A friend of his told the press he was taking time to deal with family matters. But I knew what that really meant. He was hiding. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just sat in the living room, the paper open on the table, staring at the black and white photo of my own face above the headline. Retired teacher battles family fraud. For years, I had taught my students about truth, how it always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deep people try to bury it. I used to believe that was a comfort. Now, I realized it was also a curse. Because truth doesn't just expose others, it exposes you too. Helen called that night. Her voice was calm, but I could tell she'd been following the news. "Maggie," she said, "are you ready for the fallout?" I looked around the room. The same walls Richard built, the same paintings, the same air I'd breathed for decades, and yet everything felt different. "I thought I was," I said slowly, "but it feels strange. Everyone sees me as strong. They don't see the cost." Helen sighed. "Justice always has a cost." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "I know," I said quietly, "but silence has a higher one." There was a long pause, the kind of pause that only exists between people who understand each other too well. Then Helen said softly, "I'm proud of you, Maggie." After we hung up, I walked outside to the terrace. The night air was sharp with salt. Down below, the waves crashed against the rocks, relentless, unapologetic. For the first time, I noticed how loud the sea could be when everything else was quiet. I thought of Lydia, somewhere, angry, cornered, scrolling through comments she couldn't control. I thought of Daniel, hiding from the truth he helped create. And I thought of Lily, innocent, still sleeping in that same house of lies. People online called me a hero, but standing there alone, I didn't feel like one. I felt tired, exposed. The kind of tired that comes not from weakness, but from carrying justice alone. Still, when I closed my eyes, I could almost hear Richard's voice in the wind, steady and calm. Protect your dignity first, not the house. And I realized that's what I had done. The house could be rebuilt, the name could be repaired, but dignity, once you lose it, it's gone. The world could talk all it wanted. I had spoken my truth. And sometimes, truth isn't about being loved, it's about being free. The courthouse stood on the edge of the cliff, the same cliff where my house sat just a few miles away. The same sea wind blew against its windows, carrying the sound of the waves into the halls. It felt symbolic somehow, that justice would be decided in a place that overlooked everything I had almost lost. The courtroom was full that morning. Cameras were waiting outside, reporters whispering, flashing lights spilling in through the glass doors. Inside, it was quiet but heavy, like the air before a storm. I could hear the faint echo of shoes against marble floors, papers shuffling, people breathing too carefully. Rebecca, my lawyer's assistant, was already setting up the projector. Thomas stood beside her, calm as always, his suit pressed, his face unreadable. Across the room, Lydia sat between two lawyers, her hair pulled back tightly, her eyes sharp and restless. Daniel sat beside her, but he couldn't look at me. His hands were folded, his shoulders slumped. I wondered if he even slept the night before. When the judge entered, the entire room rose. "Be seated," he said. His tone clipped, professional but kind. I sat slowly, feeling the weight of the months that had led here. The clerk began reading the case summary, the charges, the evidence, the testimonies. My name sounded strange in that setting. Mrs. Margaret Cole, plaintiff. I used to sign attendance sheets with that name, grade essays, send Christmas cards. Now it was attached to a court case, a headline, a fight for my life. Rebecca wheeled the projector closer to the bench. The judge nodded. You may proceed. She took a deep breath, pressed play. The screen lit up with Marisol's video. The image was grainy but clear enough. My bedroom, my safe, my son and his wife standing over it. Lydia's voice rang through the speakers, confident, smug. Once this is signed, she's done, legally and mentally. The courtroom was silent. You could hear the creak of chairs as people leaned forward. Lydia's lawyer stood up immediately. Objection, Your Honor. This is an invasion of privacy. The recording was obtained without consent. Rebecca turned toward him, her voice calm but cutting. Privacy doesn't apply to crimes. The judge raised a hand. Objection overruled. The video stays. Lydia's mouth dropped open. You can't do this. You can't show. Her lawyer tried to hush her, but she kept talking, her voice rising higher. This is all fake. She's manipulating everyone. That woman is sick. She's been sick for years. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp. Mrs. Grant, control your client. Lydia sat down hard, her face flushed red, her hands shaking. Thomas stepped forward. Your Honor, the defense has claimed mental incapacity. We'd like to introduce evidence proving otherwise. He held up a folder. Inside were the official documents, the bank's cognitive report, signed statements from doctors, and a written testimony from Helen, my sister. Each one said the same thing. No signs of dementia, no decline in mental function. The judge flipped through the pages slowly. Duly noted. Then Rebecca played the second video, the short clip from Lily's tablet, recorded without anyone realizing. Lydia's voice again cold and dismissive. Grandma won't even remember any of this soon. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Even the reporters at the back looked uncomfortable. For a moment I didn't breathe. Watching it again, hearing her say those words, hurt just as much as the first time, but this time I wasn't powerless. When the video ended, the judge looked up. His eyes found mine. Mrs. Cole, would you like to make a statement? I stood slowly, my knees ached, but my voice was steady. Yes, Your Honor. I turned, looking straight at Lydia first. Her face was hard, but her eyes betrayed something else now. Fear. Daniel's head was bowed, his jaw trembling. My son, I said quietly, forgot who raised him. But I haven't forgotten who I am. The room went completely still. You could hear a pen drop. I looked at the judge again. All I wanted was peace. All I wanted was dignity. They tried to take both, not because they needed the money, but because they thought I was too weak to notice. They were wrong. I sat down. The air in the room felt different, heavier, cleaner, like a truth that could no longer be hidden. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you, Mrs. Cole. He turned to the defense. Do you have anything to add? Lydia's lawyer started to speak, but Lydia jumped in before he could. She's twisting everything. Daniel didn't mean it like that. He was just... Mrs. Grant, the judge interrupted firmly, was to sit down. Her voice cracked, but she obeyed. Daniel still hadn't looked up. The judge reviewed the documents once more, then leaned forward slightly. This court finds clear and convincing evidence of fraud, forgery, and attempted misappropriation of property belonging to Mrs. Margaret Cole. Lydia's breath caught. Daniel finally looked up, his face pale. The property known as the Cole residence, the judge continued, is to be immediately returned to Mrs. Cole. Furthermore, the forged medical documents and falsified transfer forms will be submitted for criminal investigation. Mrs. Lydia Grant and her associates are hereby charged with fraud and conspiracy. The sound of the gavel striking wood echoed through the chamber. Lydia gasped. Her lawyer tried to calm her, but she broke down, shouting something about betrayal, about how she did everything for the family. No one listened. The bailiff moved closer. Daniel stood slowly, eyes glassy, voice breaking. Mom. I looked at him. For a long time, neither of us spoke. There were 1,000 things I wanted to say. About love, about mistakes, about forgiveness, but none of them felt right. So I said nothing. I just nodded once. He lowered his eyes again. Outside, through the tall windows, the ocean roared. The sound filled the room, blending with the murmurs and the shuffle of papers. It was the same sea Richard used to paint, the same one that had watched all of this unfold. The judge rose. Court is adjourned. Everyone began to move, whispering, packing, exhaling. I sat still. For a moment I closed my eyes and just listened. To the sea, the wind, the sound of justice echoing in a room built on the edge of the world. Thomas touched my shoulder gently. "It's over," he said. I nodded. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. Not yet. Not here. Outside, the reporters were waiting, shouting questions, snapping photos. "Mrs. Cole, how do you feel?" "What will you do next?" I just smiled faintly and said, "Go home. Tell your mothers you love them." Then I kept walking. When I reached the car, I looked back at the courthouse one last time. The sun had broken through the clouds, lighting the white stone walls. It stood tall against the sky, unshaken, silent, righteous. As the engine started, the ocean wind came through the open window. I could almost hear Richard's voice again, soft and certain. "Protect your dignity first, not the house." This time I smiled, because I finally understood. I had protected both. The sound of the gavel was still echoing in my ears when we stepped out of the courtroom. The sky was bright, too bright, like it didn't understand what had just happened inside. The air smelled of salt and concrete. The sea was somewhere below the cliff, invisible but loud, as if it too had been waiting for the verdict. Reporters rushed forward, microphones everywhere, cameras flashing. For a second, I couldn't see anything but white light. Then I heard her voice, sharp, furious, cracking at the edges. "You destroyed us." Lydia's scream cut through the crowd. Her mascara had run down her face, her hair messy from the chaos inside. She looked like someone who had finally realized the story was no longer hers to control. I turned toward her, calm, almost tired. My voice came out low, but it carried. "No," I said. "You destroyed us when you stopped seeing me as family." For a moment, everything went silent. Even the cameras paused. Lydia just stood there, her mouth open as if the words had hit somewhere deeper than she expected. Then she looked away, hiding her face from the flashes. Daniel stood a few steps behind her. He didn't speak. His eyes met mine for just a second, enough to say what words couldn't. Regret, shame, maybe even a quiet kind of love that came too late. He turned away before I could decide what to do with it. The crowd began to move again. Voices, questions, chaos. "Mrs. Cole, how does it feel to win?" "What will you do with the property now?" "Do you plan to forgive your family?" I didn't answer. I just kept walking. Rebecca stayed close, shielding me from the reporters. When we reached the steps, she turned and squeezed my hand. "You won," she said softly, her eyes bright with relief. I shook my head. "No, Rebecca. I survived. Winning is for games. This was life." She didn't reply. She just nodded, understanding. We stood there for a moment, watching the press swarm around Lydia as she tried to push through the crowd. Her voice rose again, angrier but weaker now, the kind of anger that comes when you know it's over. I turned away before it could reach me. Thomas came out last, holding the final papers in a neat folder. He handed them to me. "It's official," he said. "Everything's back in your name." "Everything?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Everything that matters on paper." I knew what he meant. Some things can't be returned. The trust, the quiet mornings, the laughter that used to fill those walls. But at least now they couldn't take anything more from me. We walked to the car in silence. The cameras followed us to the curb but didn't dare cross the line. The sound of shutters filled the air, click, 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 the rhythm of strangers trying to capture someone else's pain. As I opened the car door, I looked back once more. Lydia was still yelling, but no one was listening anymore. The story had moved on, without her. When the car started, I leaned back and closed my eyes. The leather was warm from the sun. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe without fear. Outside, the road curved along the edge of the cliff. I could see the ocean again, endless, alive, wild. The same view Richard loved. The same place where everything began and ended. Rebecca broke the silence. "What now?" I looked out the window, watching the sunlight hit the water in silver streaks. "Now," I said quietly, "I go home." We didn't talk after that. The road hummed under the tires, the sea followed beside us. When we reached the gates of my house, I saw the lavender bushes swaying in the wind. The garden was overgrown, a little wild, but still beautiful. I stepped out and touched the gate, cold, solid, mine. Rebecca hesitated. Do you want me to stay? I smiled. No, dear. I think I need to walk in alone this time. She nodded and left. The car drove off slowly until all I could hear again was the sea. I opened the gate. The hinges creaked softly, the same sound they'd made for 30 years. Each step felt heavier but steadier. The air inside smelled faintly of dust and lavender. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't hurt anymore. I walked to the window facing the cliff and stood there for a long time. The horizon was endless, the light soft. For a brief moment I felt Richard beside me, not as a memory but as a calm presence. We did it, I whispered. Maybe it wasn't victory. Maybe it wasn't even justice in the grand sense. But it was survival. It was dignity. And that was enough. The flashes, the shouting, the anger, they all faded behind me, carried away by the wind. All that remained was the sea, and me, still standing. The house looks different now. The walls are fresh, the colors softer. The smell of paint still lingers faintly in the air, mixing with lavender from the garden. I hired a few workers to fix what was broken. The door hinges, the shutters, the tiles in the kitchen. Nothing grand, just quiet restoration. Every morning I sit by the window with my tea and listen to the sea. The sound is the same as before, steady, forgiving. The garden has come back to life. Lavender blooms across the fence, purple and proud, swaying like it remembers the chaos and chose peace anyway. Rebecca came by last week. She stood on the porch, looking around, smiling. You didn't just win, Mrs. Cole, she said. You set a precedent. You reminded people that being old doesn't mean being powerless. I laughed softly. Good teachers never retire, I told her. They just change classrooms. She smiled, eyes bright. I guess this one has the best view. When she left, I stayed on the porch a little longer, watching the sun fade into the ocean. The light touched the windows, and for a moment it looked like the house itself was breathing again. Alive, steady, whole. Inside, the rooms are quiet but not empty. They hold peace now, not tension. Every corner feels like a small victory, every sound a reminder that dignity, once reclaimed, makes everything shine a little brighter. I still talk to Richard sometimes. Not out loud, just in my head. I tell him the lavender came back, that the sea still hits the cliffs the same way, that the house still stands. Stronger, maybe. Wiser. I touch the window frame he built years ago and whisper, We did it, love. We protected everything that mattered. The house doesn't answer. It doesn't need to. It just stands there, solid, sunlit, and free. It happened on a quiet morning, the kind where the sea is calm and the light slips gently through the curtains. I was in the garden, trimming the lavender, when I heard footsteps on the gravel, slow, hesitant. When I looked up, Daniel was standing by the gate. He looked thinner, his shoulders drawn, his eyes carrying something I hadn't seen in a long time. Not guilt, not pride, but exhaustion. The kind that comes from finally seeing the truth and not knowing what to do with it. He stopped a few feet away. Mom, he said softly. His voice cracked on the word. I'm sorry. I didn't answer right away. The shears in my hand felt heavy. The sea hummed behind us, steady, like it was listening too. He took a breath. Not for the money, not for the house. For forgetting you. For letting someone make me believe you were the problem. I studied his face. Older, lined, tired. My son, my mistake, my miracle. Forgiveness takes time, I said finally. My voice was calm even. But at least you remembered I'm still your mother. He nodded, his eyes wet, but he didn't try to come closer. We both knew some distances take longer to cross than a few steps. And then, from behind him, a small voice broke the stillness. Grandma? Lily ran past him, her hair flying in the wind, her laugh bright and full. She went straight to me, kneeling beside the flower beds. Can I help you in the garden? I smiled and handed her a small pot with fresh soil and a tiny sprig of lavender. Yes, darling, I said. Justice also needs watering. She giggled, not fully understanding, and started patting the soil around the roots with her little hands. Daniel watched us silently, his face softening as he knelt too, helping her. For a while, none of us spoke. We just worked. One old pair of hands, one young, both touching the same earth. The air smelled of salt and sun, The sea breathed in and out, and the lavender swayed gently around us. When Lily looked up, her cheeks smudged with dirt, she said, "Grandma, is it done?" "Not yet," I said. "Things like this take time." She smiled. "Like forgiveness?" I looked at her, surprised. Then I laughed, a small, quiet laugh that carried further than I expected. "Exactly like that, sweetheart." The wind picked up and the sunlight poured through the trees, touching everything with gold. I felt Richard somewhere in that light, not as a voice this time, but as warmth. Daniel stood up, brushed the dirt from his hands, and looked at me. "Thank you for letting me come." "You came," I said simply. "That's enough for today." He nodded again, eyes lowered, and for the first time in years, I saw peace instead of pride. As they left later that afternoon, Lily waved from the gate. "Bye, Grandma. Don't forget to water Justice." I laughed again, the sound soft against the sea. "I won't, my love," I whispered. When they were gone, I looked down at the small lavender plant we'd just buried in the earth. The soil was dark and rich. The sprig was fragile but alive. I pressed the dirt gently around its roots and stood back. The sun touched it, and it seemed to stand taller, braver. Maybe forgiveness was just like that, something you plant together even when it hurts, and trust the light to do the rest. I once lost my home, but I found my strength, and that's something no one can ever steal. For a long time, I thought justice was about punishment, about proving who was right and who was wrong. But now I know it's quieter than that. It's the sound of your own heartbeat when you finally stop being afraid. It's walking through your house without feeling like a guest. It's looking at the sea and realizing it still belongs to you. People talk about closure like it's an ending, but for me, it's a beginning, one where the noise is gone and all that's left is peace. The house stands again. The lavender grows again. And I'm still here. Not as the woman they tried to erase, but as the woman who learned that dignity, once reclaimed, is stronger than any wall, any wound, any storm.